I've been using Adobe Lightroom for a couple of years now, and I've come across multiple images that make one of these 5 mistakes. And if you stick with me till the end, you would learn 5 beginner mistakes to avoid when using Adobe Lightroom. So let's talk about the first thing, exposure. Looking at this image, it's dark. So that tells us that the image is underexposed. So the first instinct would probably be to bring the image to like a reasonable space. Now I've pushed the exposure like 2 stops over. She looks bright now, but already we can see the issues. We're clipping out most of the highlights. I've already enabled the highlight clipping button. So that just gives me an idea of what is now pure white. So I'm going to stage the exposure not so far away from where it was, which was from this point, and I'm going to move it just like a stop over, because this will give me better control of the image. If I had staged my exposure somewhere around 2, if I was trying to recover most of these highlights, I would have to push further down to recover the highlights, and then the image loses all the contrast. Whereas if I stage the exposure just in a reasonable position, that way I don't have to push the slider too far to recover all the highlights. The next question might be, what is a reasonable exposure? We don't need to do any guesswork. We can assess the exposure using the histogram. The histogram is basically a bucket of data. If all the data in the bucket is full, it's going to spill out. And that's when we have like the clipping and overexposure. And if the bucket is not completely full, we'll have underexposure. Like, look at this. Right now, we can see that we don't have enough data in the rest part of the image. You can see the mapping is here, blacks, shadows, midtones, which is where the exposure is moving from, highlights, and the white point. So looking at this distribution tells me what the exposure of the image is like. Now, this is not to say that I always want my exposure to be somewhere in the middle. It really depends on the context of the image and my intention behind the image. So let's talk about white balance. One of the challenges people might face with images is attempting to use white balance like it's a color grading tool. Right now, as you're looking at this image, you can already tell the white balance is way too warm. So we would try to push the white balance to a point where the image feels a little more neutral. And then we have a better reproduction of the skin tone, the white neutrals. And if we want to push warmth into the image, we have better ways of doing that, like using our curves. Like if we push some red tones and some green tones into the highlights and midtones, we already get a sense of warmth in the image. One mistake you might also make is to think that the contrast slider is controlling the contrast in your image. Technically, the contrast slider is controlling the distance between the darkest point and the brightest point of your image. So when you move the contrast slider to the right, you're basically just pulling the black point and the white point away from each other. And when you reduce the contrast, you're pulling the white point and black point closer to each other. So when you're thinking about contrast, don't just think about, oh, white point, black point. Think about, what does this image need in terms of contrast? How can I inject tone into this image? And that's why tone curves like this are a more reasonable way of injecting contrast without overly cooking the image. Skin tones are also a clear signal of over-edited imagery. Once the skin looks bad, we automatically know that something is wrong with the image. Look at her right now. She looks dead. She doesn't have that rich skin that she had earlier. And this could be for a couple of reasons. The kind of contrast curve you use, the kind of tone curves that you also use, the shape of your tone curves, and how contrasty the image might be. Also, something like white balance might also play a huge role. Bringing the white balance to a neutral point always helps us to get us more reasonable skin tones. And now the last thing I'll talk about is over editing the image. Most times people might just look at this image, come in here and then pull the contrast all the way, push the saturation to the max, and then drop the highlights, drop the whites, crunch the blacks, and now the image just looks like a hot mess. The best way to think about images is to build it up step by step. Look at the image for what it is. Start from stuff as simple as exposure. Let's take away the tone curves for a second. So let's even reset it. So start from things like as simple as exposure. Then you can figure out the white balance. And the white balance is not just warm and cool. The white balance is tint and temperature. So the tint, which is green and magenta, is also something you should pay attention. If the image is leaning too green, you know your white balance is wrong. And if it's leaning to magenta, you also know your white balance is wrong. And then when we're thinking about contrast, that's where our curves come in. So for curves, we want to use as little points as possible. So that way, I'll just create 2 points here, inject some contrast from that point. That way, I'm not pushing the image too far and I've gotten a good result. This is the best way to approach editing images without pushing it too far or requiring too many moves. The takeaway I want you to have from this video is that less is more. You want to be able to inject a change in the image without having to think too much about what to do or having to push the image too far and then it becomes unbearable to see from the viewer. You need to assess the exposure, you need to check the white balance and the actual contrast in the image, not just pushing the white point and the black point away from each other. So you need to know exactly why you're moving the sliders. It's best if you're not moving the sliders at all than you move the slider without knowing why. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed every bit of it as much as I did. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. I want to let you guys know that I'm starting a new challenge called Fix My Photo, where on this channel, we'll be editing photos that you submit. So all you have to do is send an email with the photos to the email displayed on the screen right now. And I can't wait to see you on the next video.